how did the market materialize? No big name starters moved. Cubs fans are disappointed there wasn't a marquee name. We'll talk about the 4 guys that you got. But when you're shopping for a front end starting pitcher, what was the asking price as you were out there for it?
Well, yeah, I mean, without going into it specifically, I think a lot of those guys would have not only taken off the major league team, but taken a lot of depth of our system. And ultimately, we made the decision that those prices didn't make sense for us to be sustainably successful. And I think the market sort of said that no one else did either, right? We're not the only team that was in that market. There's a lot of teams looking for that kind of starting pitcher. And I think, obviously, the fact that everyone sort of made the same decision, it kind of tells you that the teams that had those kind of pitchers, they really value them. It's hard to draft and develop and have a starting pitcher like that under control. And so I think when teams do, rightfully, they expect a massive return to do it. And so, like I said, we made that decision organizationally that was not the right thing for us. And obviously, the fact that none of those guys changed hands indicates that we weren't alone.
How do you see the new pieces fitting into what you're trying to do going forward?
Yeah, the biggest focus, obviously we were in the starting pitching market, but we just wanted to make sure we added the right amount of depth, to the roster. I think Willie Castro provides that from a bench standpoint. He allows Craig to give guys days off. He ensures against injury. He's a switch hitter, and he can play multiple positions. So that really helps upgrade our depth, in one person. And then, we talked a lot about this, providing, we talked about, going out and getting a number of pitchers, to bolster the roster. Obviously, with going out and getting Soroka, Kittredge, Rogers, we added guys to the bullpen. We added guys, Soroka to the rotation. And we have some guys coming back off the IL, hopefully soon, and Italian and Assad. So, focusing on just making sure we have the right amount of depth because, having a really deep 26-man roster and a deep 40-man roster is super important as you get later in the season, and we want to make sure we could do that.
So people are going to point to the fact that you just signed an extension and then didn't go all in. Are the two related in any way?
No. I mean, I sort of pride myself on focusing on, the team, the organization, not about myself. It's never about me. It's always about, making sure I do the right thing for the Ricketts family and making sure I do the right thing for the organization. And so they're not connected. I feel like the goal is to be really good this year. I think we are a really good team. We've shown that so far, but also the goal is to be on this, on this telethon every year and be good. That's the focus. I think that making sure that we have a chance to, be a playoff contender every single year. That's the goal because that's, in my opinion, that's ultimately how you end up winning is just you kind of consistently good every single year. I think that you have, the magical run. I think just pushing in to have one season, I think is not something that I think is the right way to ultimately, bring a championship back here. We want to do this every year. And I think that has to be a focus. So you're always balancing the now with the long term. And I think ultimately, we traded some good prospects away today for sure, but we weren't, kind of willing to pay the price on some of those controllable starters because we felt like the impact down the road would be felt. And I would say, one of the challenges is that, a lot of the prospects we'd be, potentially trading away, these guys are either in the big leagues now or they're about to be in the big leagues. And, I think that, you look at Matt Shaw, you look at PCA, you look at Palencia, you look at Kate Horton. I mean, our farm system is really impacting our team every day right now, and that's super important. You can't be a sustainably good team without having those kind of young players coming up and not only providing energy and talent, but also providing the right payroll efficiency and the right years of control. So I know sometimes we always say, they're just prospects, but when I think about all the great players we've had since I've been here, at one point those guys were all just prospects, and I think that you have to make sure you have the right amount of care for those guys because the right way to run a sustainably good organization is to have a great farm system.
Yeah, we're talking to Jed Hoyer here on the Cubs for a Cure Radiothon. Just a little bit more on the baseball side of it. I remember you guys would always say, you Theo, like every opportunity to win a championship is precious. But then you want to be set up for sustained success going forward. I got to imagine that's a pull, like a tug and pull battle for you? Because like this team feels good enough to win a championship, but maybe not at the expense of one 3 years from now. But this one matters more than the hypothetical 3 years from now. How do you wrestle with it?
No, that literally is the wrestling match over and over is that, right? It's what at what expense are you doing this to your future? And listen, like we had a lot of conversations about controllable starters. We had a lot of conversations about good relievers. I think ultimately it wasn't an unwillingness to part with prospects. It was sort of an unwillingness to go to the length that we would have to go and the depth and the volume we would have to go. So I think there's no question, you have to be willing to part with prospects to get really good players. I think the question is just how many and at what cost. But you framed it really well, and that's the constant back and forth you have all the time. Like, and also it's about what players are actually available. And I think that's always an important thing. At the deadline, it's a sort of a select group of players based on who's out of the race and who's willing to transact. And some of the guys that people thought were available, like they weren't actually even available. There was, the teams that said, we're just not going to talk about that. So it isn't free agency. It's a kind of thing where sometimes there's just simply players that are unattainable, either because they're on contenders or because the teams, want to win next year and they don't want to focus on that, or they don't want to do that to their fan base. So, in some ways, it was an interesting deadline in the sense that some of the teams that I really expected to sell bought, and some of the teams that I expected to sell just stood pat. And when that happens, there's not much you can do to make those players available. So I think in that regard, it was certainly an interesting deadline because the behavior wasn't quite as rational as usual.
Right. So that's why it felt like an underwhelming deadline across the industry then.
Well, I think Minnesota, really was aggressive, and that probably changed a lot of the deadline. They traded their whole bullpen away, and they traded a couple starters away. They traded us Willie Castro. They traded Correa. So they really, in some ways, like that one team, being super aggressive to sell, kind of changed the landscape. But in general, there was a number of teams that, like I said, probably in a normal year. If you look at a normal year, teams are fairly rational about where their playoff odds are and what their decision making is, and this is a year that probably didn't hold as true as usual.
So there's this whole thing on Kyle Tucker. Are we going to sign Kyle Tucker? Are they going to sign Kyle Tucker? And he's got this thing that's so valuable, lefty slug. And then you got this guy in Owen Casey who's got this thing that's so valuable in lefty slug. Is that at all connected, that you don't know that if Kyle Tucker will be here long term, so you can't put Owen Casey in a trade?
Well, certainly, I think Owen's a really good player, and he's had a great year, and we think he's going to be a really bright part of our future. And I think that he also can be part of a bright future that involves Kyle Tucker as well. So, just I just say like they're somewhat connected in a way, because I think it's hard to find left-handed slug, and he's really performed well, and he's still really young. He's a great kid, but it isn't as if we can't have both. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's, when I look around baseball, there's so many teams I think struggle, with their position playing group. And I think we have a really envious group of position players, and that's really, fueled a lot of our success this year is that we play really good defense. We have a great approach at the plate. We have a good offense. We run the bases well, and I think that's something that we want to continue.
So, how annoying are the Brewers to you? They annoy me, Jen. They're really good. They're really good.
They're really good. They're really good.
It's really annoying. It's really annoying.
And really creative. They find they do a really good job year after year, and that they're not going to go away. They're going to be good every year. And I think that the way they operate as a franchise is going to ensure that they're good every year. They make really hard decisions. They traded Devin Williams. They traded their closer before this year, and they got Caleb Durbin in that deal. They traded their number one starter a year ago and got Joey Ortiz, their shortstop, and DL Hall. Like they they make really hard decisions, and frankly, not always really popular decisions, but they're constantly sustaining themselves year after year after year, and as a result, they're going to be there every year. And I think that so I think that the idea that we have to match them, and we have to be really good, because you're right, like they don't go away. They're sustainable.
Yeah, you guys are one game back of them, and they have the best record in baseball. So you guys have the second most wins in baseball, but you're in second place in your own division. Still feels like this can be a very special season. Like how do you kind of handicap, because now the dust is settled basically. How do you handicap what you have going forward for the sprint down the finish?
Yeah, I mean I think they're 25-9, or I don't know, something like that. And, since we played them the last time, they've been on an incredible run. And I mean, I don't think we should. We have as you said, with second best record in baseball. We've played great so far, and we just need to keep doing what we've been doing. I think if we do that, I try my hardest. You can't help but scoreboard watch. I think that's just the nature of these jobs. But also, I just constantly preach, like, the most important thing is to focus on your team and what you're doing and how you're playing. Except for the games we play them, we can't control what they do. That's right. The bottom line. And so now we have to focus on our club. And I think, like I said, I think if I told anyone that we'd be 18 over and have the best run differential in baseball at the deadline, I think you would jump for joy when I said that. So we played great so far, and like I said, we wanted to build the depth to keep that going in the second half.
Yeah, so last thing, because it's a weird spot. I feel like it's been an unbelievable success. PCA became a star. It's been wildly entertaining. Totally deserved contract extension. You're here. You're second best record in baseball. But then this deadline doesn't exactly play out like fans want or like the media speculated, which is often, we're obviously wrong all the time. But you said even yourself, it didn't always act rationally. Like, you made smart moves in your head and your heart, but do you leave a deadline like this disappointed because there isn't like a bigger prize attached to it?
I think disappointed would be the wrong word. I think that, I think, going into these deadlines, you're going to have to make hard decisions. And listen, there's always a yes. You can always say yes and do the thing that feels good in the moment that, might really feel bad later on, and I think that, sort of having the discipline to realize that, okay, that's too much short-term gratification and too much long-term pain, and you always are having that debate. And I think that's the constant, that's the battle. And I understand. Listen, I'm a sports fan. I understand that people want that huge deal. They want the instant gratification. They want to see that number one starter walk through the door. And I totally understand that. But I could list off countless examples of deals that very quickly turn sideways, and you're like, oh my goodness, they gave up all this talent for this. And so I think you're constantly trying to remind yourself through your experience of when you've been in this position before, how you've reacted. And I think ultimately, so disappointed is the wrong word. I think you try your hardest and push your hardest within your within your boundaries to make deals, but I think you can't be disappointed if you did the right thing for the organization.